Hello and welcome to MinidiscTV. I'm your host Lachlan, and on this episode we'll be comparing the Audeze LCD2 Classic versus the new LCD2 closed back that we just got in the store. So just like with our comparison between the Sennheiser HD820 and the 800S, we have a sealed closed back variant of a much loved classic design, though in this case these two are much closer in price. So with the LCD2 closed back, you get, as the name suggests, aluminium shells that completely seal off the headphone, meaning a substantial increase in noise isolation and a reduction in sound leakage. We also get much thicker ear pads on the closed back LCD2 versus the original classic design, though the ear pads are already quite plush on the LCD2C, so this doesn't really do much to change comfort. One thing you do notice is that with the new ear pads and the new aluminium shells, the closed back LCD2 is much heavier than the original LCD2C design. And this is something that you do feel in your neck and on the top of your head, because the LCD2C is already not a particularly lightweight headphone. And I know this just from owning one myself. So the added weight is definitely something that you do notice, and it's honestly my least favorite aspect of this headphone. Now, as far as sound goes, the differences between these two are subtle, but they are significant. So let's start by talking a bit about the LCD2 Classic so we have a point of reference. Now, the LCD2C is a headphone that is well loved for its bass response, and it's what a lot of people would call a dark headphone because it has a stronger emphasis in the low frequencies where that kind of meaty, punchy bass response lies, and in comparison the high frequencies are stepped back. They're a little more relaxed. Now, it's important to note that unlike a lot of other headphones that you would consider bassy, the bass on the LCD2C is quite well controlled in that it goes very deep, but it's relatively even and flat, so there's not much bleed from the sub-bass into the mid-bass frequencies, unlike a lot of other warmer sounding bassy headphones like the Audio-Technica ATH R70X or the Sennheiser HD650. Also, when you look at the highs, you have a high frequency response that is definitely stepped back compared to the rest of the frequencies, but it's also lacking in any particular harsh peaks, and it still manages to remain very detailed and very fast. So overall, you get a very precise sounding headphone, but at the same time, it's got a nice, rich, relaxed tone. It works really well with electronic music, with synthesizers, with any of that kind of thing, though it can be accused of being relatively subdued or sort of sleepy with acoustic or jazz or kind of classical music. So when we move on to the closed back LCD2, we hear these changes. First of all, the bass on the closed back LCD2 gets even deeper, even tighter, and the LCD2C already has some incredible bass, but this adds just that little extra bit of warmth and slam that I personally find really addictive. Though don't let me make you think that the closed back LCD2 is an even warmer headphone than the LCD2C, because along with that change in the bass, you also get a change in the mid and high frequencies, particularly around 1 to 4 kilohertz, where female vocal registers or things like brass instruments lie. The closed back is more energetic and has more of those mid and high frequencies, meaning the whole thing sounds a bit crisper, brighter, more lively. So on the genres where the LCD2C could be called sort of sleepy or subdued sounding, the LCD2 closed back adds that extra energy, which is really quite welcome. However, it's sort of a double-edged sword because on the genres where the LCD2C being stepped back in the treble was a little more forgiving for electronic music and for those kind of synthesizers where the mix can get a little aggressive, with the closed back, you start approaching a point where the treble and the mid-range can get a bit fatiguing on some tracks. On other tracks, I do like the changes in sound. The increase in the mid-range and the high frequencies helps to compensate for the slightly more compressed sound stage on the LCD2 closed back, because by closing off the headphone, the soundstage has collapsed slightly, and the extra energy helps to widen that back out a little bit. This is tough for me to evaluate because for a lot of tracks, I really appreciate the extra energy, the extra slam that the LCD2 closed back brings to the table. But for a lot of other tracks, the extra energy can sound a little bit too raw. It tends to pick up sibilance, and overall, it's a much less forgiving headphone than the LCD2 Classic. Now, personally, for me, because the Classic version works with a wider variety of music, and because it's just a bit more comfortable than the closed back, this is my pick. But you may prefer the zestier sound of the LCD2 closed back, or you may simply need more noise isolation, and that's what makes it a good choice in those circumstances. So come in and have a listen to these side by side and let us know what you think. You can check the video description for links and ask us any questions you have in the comments. This is Lachlan from MinidiscTV. See ya.